we have done a number of Benjamin Britten operas, and our relationship with this great composer began in 1993 with A Midsummer Night's Dream. And it continued with The Rape of Lucretia in 1996, our first production of Turn of the Screw in 1997, and then I guess culminating with Albert Herring in 2013, another production of Midsummer Night's Dream, and then during the Britten centenary, I don't know if anyone remembers at St. John's, all those divine little children in Neues Flöde, and also at the Belfry in Let's Make an Opera. So it's been a fantastic journey for us. And I think we all, everybody, our audience, our administration, our music direction, we all deserve a bit of a pat on the back for being pretty much the only small company of this size in North America that can say that about presenting works by Britten, and generally extremely well. Now, Britten as an opera as an opera composer, I can say conductor too, because I didn't say this at the first presentation, but Britten conducted the first recordings of almost every opera that was recorded by him, and they all have mistakes. And I like to remember that because we're expected to be note perfect, and here are the singers and players under Britten's own direction, making the odd mistake here or there. We forget sometimes that it was new music. Peter Grimes, when it premiered in 1945, it's hard enough now, it must have been excruciatingly hard for those participants, but that was Britten's very first incredible success as an opera composer. And has anyone had a chance to see Peter Grimes staged? It's an awesome experience, but you can see why. It's a grand opera. It needs a big house with big resources. It has a massive chorus, and the music is difficult. It requires a very large orchestra. It has a large cast. And its success in 1945 has always baffled me a little bit, simply because not only is it very expensive at a time when London was really in pretty bad shape, but also at a time when people had been traumatized by the events of World War II, and it hadn't quite been finished yet. There's about 2 months left to go. Here is this story being presented that is incredibly dark and pessimistic, ambiguous. We don't really know if we're meant to feel some sympathy for Peter Grimes. How did he get to be? Just sheer horror at what he's done. He causes the death of 2 young boys, inadvertently perhaps, but he still causes it. How are we supposed to feel? It's not only dark, it asks us to answer unanswerable questions. It asks us to indict ourselves as a society for the way we treat our outcasts, and that's always how Britten perceived himself. And here this is presented at this time of trauma and sadness, but it was a massive success. However, Britten looked around and saw the state that his country was in financially, in terms of every other kind of resource with, as I said, psychic trauma, and he thought, we can't imagine that we can continue to perform grand operas regularly and on that scale, but as he had learned, as everybody had learned during that war, we must have culture, we must have access to live performances of music, of theater, and of opera. So he devised his first chamber opera, and I'm mentioning this in some detail because that's what The Turn of the Screw is. It's a chamber opera, and in 1946 gave us The Rape of Lucretia, which is for no chorus, an orchestra of about 13 players, and a very reduced cast. And it's interesting that he wrote this for one particular person. Now, of course, every opera he wrote had a part in it for his life partner, Peter Pears, that was tailor-made to Pears's particular characteristic voice and technique. So the role of Lucretia was written for the great English contralto Kathleen Ferrier, and it was tailor-made to everything that that person could do, and avoided some of the things that she felt uncomfortable with. And that was followed by Albert Herring, his only comedy, although as I like to say, like any great comedy, it has underpinnings of poignancy and sadness. And then he went on to have 2 more success. Well, no, I'm lying. 1 success with a grand opera in Billy Budd. Has anyone had the opportunity to see Billy Budd? It's a fantastic piece. All male voices, which is a challenge for a composer. And just to let you know that it was not a comedy, it ends with a hanging, having also had a murder. So then we moved to The Turn of the Screw, but between the 2 of them, Britten was asked to compose an opera to commemorate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and he decided to set the story in the Elizabethan era with Queen Elizabeth I as his heroine. That work is called Gloriana, and it was not met with critical success or popular success. We'll just park that at the back burner of this presentation because I will bring it back later. It was the only opera of Britten's that was not recorded commercially during his lifetime. So that says quite a lot because Britten was very well established. He will go on, of course, to write more operas, but we'll focus now on Turn of the Screw. He received this commission from a festival in Venice just as he was working on Gloriana. And so it was quite time sensitive because the opera was meant to be produced and performed in Venice in the late summer of 1954. And he was already working on Gloriana. Now, the commission was not to set this particular story, it was just to write an opera. And so he had a friend named John Piper. John Piper had designed the sets for his work going back to Rape of Lucretia. And Piper's wife, Myfanwy, came up with the idea, I think you should have a look at The Turn of the Screw, the novella by Henry James. Has anyone read that, by the way? I read it so long ago that I didn't remember it. But you don't need to read it to like this opera. And, has anyone seen a movie called The Innocence, starring Deborah Kerr? And I think that's a fantastic movie. Anyway, enough of that. So the reason that they thought, that Myfanwy and John Piper thought that this would be an ideal project for Benjamin Britten is because of the ambiguity, the feeling of uncertainty, the idea of people being in a community but not being able to actually interact with each other, the idea of alienation, and just because it's a really spooky ghost story. And so he asked her to make a draft, a sort of dramaturgical outline through which they may see if perhaps it might be a good topic after all. He certainly was fond of the short story, or short novel. And so she did, and he was so impressed with it, he asked her to write the libretto, even though she had never done such a project before. So they worked actually, it seems, very quickly, very congenially, which wasn't always the case with BB, and with a terrific result. Now, one of the things to talk about when we're talking about Britten and his particular personality, we'll talk about the music in a little bit, but why he identified so strongly with the idea of an outsider, someone who was alienated from his community or her community, someone who was made to feel like an outcast, that did not belong, that was sort of jettisoned. And he felt himself to be an alienated person in three ways. First, of course, as everybody knows, he was gay at a time when it was not only legal, but there was in England a very, very definite and strong decision to persecute gay people, to go after them. About 428 gay men were arrested and convicted of indecency for having sex with consenting adults in private. So there was a bit of a witch hunt, not unlike what was happening in the US with the House Un-American Activities. So he felt very alienated from society because of this. He also felt, well, he had gone through a difficult period in the years immediately following the war because he and Pierce had basically signed up as conscientious objectors and as pacifists. And during the last war, this was called sometimes the just war. It was difficult enough in the First World War, but it was pretty difficult for an Englishman who was of age to refuse to serve. And so he always carried around that as well. As a matter of fact, one of his colleagues, who seems not to have liked him very much, said he found it difficult to decide why he disliked him more, because he was gay or because he was a pacifist. But there was a third reason that is the most potent one for us, or at least it is when we listen to the operas, and that is he felt his music did not belong in any of the camps, as it were. The 50s was a period of intense avant-garde experimentation in some elements of music. Composers like Morton Feldman in the United States, for example, had taken the position that they don't need to think about their audiences when they write music. They don't care what the audiences think. They don't even care if the audiences come to the concerts. That's always easier to say when you have a tenure track position at a university. And it's not coincidental that most of this took place amongst composers at universities. But he didn't belong to any of that. He knew about these different idioms that were being experimented with, and he did absorb from them what he wanted, but that's all. By the same token, although he loved folk music, and he arranged folk songs, and he also includes two of them in Turn of the Screw, he didn't want to belong to that sort of pastoral quasi-Renaissance folk music kind of movement either, that characterizes much of the music of Sir Ralph Vaughan Williams. Can I tell you what Aaron Copland said about Ralph Vaughan Williams? Listening to his Symphony No. 2 was like looking at a cowpat for 45 minutes. So Benjamin Britten didn't want that said about him. So also his influences are incredibly wide and eclectic. He certainly Debussy, Shostakovich, Mahler, any number of other composers, Mozart, perhaps above all Schubert. He idolized Schubert. But at the same token, he had tremendous hates too. He couldn't stand Brahms. And every now and again, he'd take out the music of Brahms and look through it. And someone said, well, are you trying to like it? And he said, no, I'm trying to see what other people see in it. But every time I take it out, it's even worse than it was the year before. So he had his blind spots, but a very wide variety of influences as well. And one of the things that he also had was an infallible sense of dramaturgy. And that's where we get to the turn of the screw's structure. Now, I'm going to ask if everybody has heard of the term 12-tone music. And do you know what it means? Would anybody like me to explain? Okay, I'll do that, and I'll go to the piano in a couple of minutes to explain. But this informs the actual structure of Turn of the Screw. It is a movement completely away from tonal music that was pioneered by Arnold Schoenberg in the late teens and early 20s. And it would define a lot of music, especially academic music, for a number of decades. And the music cannot really escape the charge of being somewhat alienating to this very day. You can put an all Schoenberg festival on in New York or Paris or London, but not in most other cities. Okay, I have to get all my stuff from over here. Thanks, I'll get that in a minute. Okay, so the idea is that Schoenberg wanted to create a system that would allow him to write music in which each of the notes did not belong to a hierarchy. Now I'm going to show you what that means. It's easier to show you than it is to explain. Yes, you almost have to do that. And that's because we have notes that sort of surround each other. This note, that note, that note. They all have different positions in a family hierarchy. And Schoenberg wanted to experiment with something that didn't do that. So he took the 12 notes and began to arrange them in a certain order. And if he arranged them in that order, then that order would remain in place throughout a piece of music. And the idea was that no one note was more important than any other. Now this is called the 12-tone technique, or dodecaphonism, or some people call it serialism. Other people have less flattering names for it. And it dominated the landscape, and there are some very, very highly regarded masterpieces in this idiom. I'm going to play you a little piano piece. It's very short, and it's by one of Schoenberg's pupils, and it is the simplest 12-tone piece I could find. Now, if I tell you that Britten's The Turn of the Screw is essentially based on a tone row, please don't get scared. It doesn't sound anything like that. Now, that piece actually was written to introduce children to the joys of 12-tone music. It's almost 100 years old and it hasn't worked yet. So now I'm going to show you the tone row that Britten invented, because really this is the basis, this is the fundament of The Turn of the Screw. It's basically like introducing 12 alphabetical letters, and then you create a whole story out of those. Oops, That already sounds friendlier, doesn't it? And we can turn them into chords. And he will transpose those into a variety of different keys throughout the whole opera. He uses the keys, the key centers, and the pitches to create a kind of idea that mirrors the title of the show, The Turn of the Screw. I'll tell you a little bit more when I go up and have the mic, or I have it here, but I'll tell you later anyway. So when we first hear that in the actual opera, it's quite palatable. And he builds on that in a variety of different ways. The tone row is not always as clear as it just was when I played it, but it's always very much there. And it allows Britten to create this sort of level of musical structure, which was very important to him. But as I've read any number of commentators say, the people in the audience have absolutely no idea what's going on. And as a matter of fact, another of the great works of dystopian opera from the 20th century is Wozzeck. And Wozzeck has a very strictly ordered structure as well. And its composer, Alban Berg, would often travel to places where the opera was being performed to lecture about this, until he finally realized that you don't need to know. The composer does, but you don't. When you go into the theater, you want to see and hear what belongs to the story and to the opera. But I thought you would be interested to know that Britten, who generally avoided the more extreme avant-garde movements in music, did borrow from them when he wanted to, and he used them in exactly the way he wanted to, and not one semicolon more. Now, I mentioned the orchestra. I wanted to mention a couple of things before we launch into the plot. When I said it's a small orchestra that requires some pretty expert players. There's a flute, but it also doubles piccolo and alto flute. There's oboe, but also doubles English horn. Does everybody know what an English horn is? Okay, does anybody not? Would you like me to tell you? Okay, it's basically like an alto oboe. So it has the same construction, but it's larger. So it plays in a lower range and it is a transposing instrument. The clarinet in A and B flat plus the bass clarinet. And then bassoon, horn, harp, a piano which doubles a celesta. Now, I'm going to play you something, or a passage from The Turn of the Screw that is played on the celesta. String quartet, so there's no string sections. There's just violin, viola, cello, and then double bass. That's it. Now, these are the instruments played by a single percussionist. Glockenspiel, tubular bells, triangle, woodblock, tom-tom, side drum, tenor drum, bass drum, 4 timpani, cymbals, and gong. Now, that's some percussion player you better hire. So, of course, there's not so much space needed except for the percussion battery that you can't produce it as Britten wanted these chamber operas produced in community halls and church halls and village gathering centers. They're portable. None of them really requires a huge, expensive set. So you can put them in a truck and carry them from one town to the next. And by that means, people in any sorts of community can have access to this music. So, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the story. Shall I do that? Okay, and at the same time tell you a bit about the overall structure. So, Myfanwy Piper and Benjamin Britten worked together very well, and I think she was quite influential on him. And it's not for nothing that some scholars have absolutely insisted this is the finest text that he ever worked with. So it begins with a prologue. And the prologue simply presents a man who's really only called prologue. He's kind of a narrator, except we never see him again. And he basically says this is an old story. And it's told about this woman who becomes a governess to 2 young children who live in the country with a servant. And he says the uncle was too busy to have anything to do with them. So he gave to the new governess one rule, one condition, and that was she was not to contact him. He was too busy. So off she went to look after the poor little niece and nephew. And the scenes are organized then so that there is a scene followed by an orchestral interlude. So there are 16 scenes in all and 15 interludes divided into 2 acts. And so we see and hear the governess making her way by horse and carriage to the estate in the country. She meets the children. I think we get the feeling she's nervous, as you'll hear in a couple of minutes. But she seems to feel like she's going to be happily at home. And she enjoys the lake and the countryside, the beauty of the trees and the beauty of nature. And suddenly she sees an apparition of a man. She has no idea who it is. And it turns out that the estate once had a valet, and his name was Peter Quint. And they also had a young governess named Miss Jessel, and they both died. But here he is, looking at the new governess, and then later on, he's looking in her bedroom window. And so she has to tell the housekeeper, Mrs. Gross. And she begins to describe this figure, and Mrs. Gross realizes that this ghost is that of Peter Quint. And he was malevolent. He was a very evil sort of influence, not only on Miss Jessel, whom he debauched. He liked them pretty, that one, all of them. And he said he made freely with all of them, which suggests Miles as well, the young boy. And it's also suggested there was something unnatural about the relationship between Miss Jessel and Flora. Something evil, sort of enticing them to move into a world of amorality. And so Mrs. Gross is horrified at this. And the rest of the story, for the most part, is a series of unravelings until ultimately there is a victory of sorts. Or is there? Mrs. Gross will ultimately take the little girl Flora away from the estate because she is so fearful for her safety. But the young boy, Miles, remains at the estate. And in the final confrontation with the governess and Peter Quint sort of vying and battling for the soul of the boy, for the first time ever, addresses Peter Quint in anger and says, "Peter Quint, you devil." There are some commentators that have actually suggested he refers to Peter Quint and then he turns to the governess and says, "You devil." I don't know that. I think that's some writers are exercising too much of their own imagination, I think. I think he's directing it towards her. So in that moment, the governess feels she's won a victory. She's won Miles from this evil, evil influence. But then Miles dies. And we don't know, really, if the ghost, certainly when we read the story, we don't know if the ghost was real or if he was only a figment of this governess's imagination. Because the other thing I'm going to suggest when we listen to her music as she's making her way to the estate is that she has a strong attraction for this man who sent her on this journey to be this children's governess. She mentions it frequently. She wishes he was there, etc., etc. So she's probably, in the terms of what we would say in the 21st century, she's frustrated sexually, repressed. And she doesn't necessarily know that. She just has the manifestations. And so when we listen to this music, we'll first of all hear a little bit about the very opening and then move into the scene where she's traveling to the country estate. Sorry, I'm feeling slightly discombobulated because of the opening interview. It's very hard to get back into this. So sorry, some of my sentences are a bit convoluted. So you all know what the term recitative means, right? Because we have it in Mozart. In this, it's quite different, but we have a piano now serving instead of a harpsichord. And all it means is the mood is set, the impetus for the prologue to actually say anything comes from the piano. That's what it feels like. And the actor or singer playing the prologue is almost always the same person playing Peter Quint. And he just says, it was a long time ago, this governess came along, etc. So I'm going to play you that. Oh, thank you. Brill.
Governess to two children long ago. Untried, innocent, she had gone first to see their guardian in London.
a fair amount of expression that's possible just in the piano, in the rolled chords. And they do have the feeling of setting the prologue's lines and framing them. The prologue, by the way, must never be hinted that could be the actual uncle. We never meet the uncle. It's just something that she refers to. This is somebody disembodied from the story getting it set up. And now we have the sound of the governess making her way to the end, to the country estate. And she's accompanied by timpani and other percussion instruments with some sustained string chords. And it's impossible to imitate that on the piano. Britten gives us notes, but it doesn't sound remotely like timpani. But this is what it sounds like. The forewarning is that the engineer did not give us enough timpani sound. So imagine it would be a little closer to you in the theater and therefore more biting. So that's her journey. And it's a very exciting one. Something similar was done in The Rape of Lucretia, as Tarquinius is looking down at Lucretia. And we feel him stalking her as she's sleeping, and all this thumping on the timpani. It's really dramatic. So she comes to the house. Everything feels like it's going to be fine. The children like her. The children are at home with Mrs. Gross. And the governess is able to settle in. And you can imagine her anxiety going to this strange environment, not knowing how she'll like the people, how they'll like her. And so she finds herself alone at night, outside in the nature, at the lake, looking at a tower. And the first thing we'll hear right now is some of the orchestral interlude that takes us into this scene. It does so very seamlessly. You're not going to be aware that there's interlude, scene, interlude, scene. It's not that kind of opera. It's not Italian. So instead, you'll hear a very smooth transition from one to the next. And the interludes will take us out of one dramatic situation and situate us into the next one. And what you hear in this is Britten's wonderful writing for solo woodwinds. Now, right at this moment, we hear the sound of the celesta. Again, you'll hear it, you'll know what it sounds like for sure, but I'll give you a bit of a broader definition in just a few minutes. We're going to get to the end of the first act. And in this, she sees Peter Quint. It says that this apparition appears on top of the tower. The tower will be associated with Peter Quint, just as this instrumental sound of the celesta will be. And she doesn't know who he is, as a strange man. Later on, as I said, he'll even be seen out of, through her window. And so the music all of a sudden becomes very agitated. But you heard what she said, oh, if only I could see him. She has the hots for that uncle in town. So she's seen him. We will also meet Miss Jessel. But I want to give you just one last example of music from this as we move into the end of the first act, and all characters who sing will be on stage at the same time. Peter Quint is introduced first, and he basically coaxes Miles to come outside, which Miles does. Then Miss Jessel coaches Flora, and they come out submissively to the spirits of these two ghosts. Mrs. Gross has already told us that something was pretty evil in what was going on. And so it's the middle of the night, so both Mrs. Gross and the governess, who never has a name, by the way, she's only ever called the governess, they go looking for the two children. So I want to play you the beginning of this scene, because what you will hear is a celesta, extensive celesta music, and also an example of a melisma. Now, do you all know what a melisma is? Sounds like a throat condition. It's not, it's actually when you have many syllables on one note, like Rejoice Greatly, anything by Mariah Carey, and most of the Italian operatic songs as well. Okay, so it's a very atmospheric work, very dramatically effective, and I hope you'll all come and see it and enjoy this world. It's not enjoyable in the sense that the movie The Innocence isn't enjoyable. Someone mentioned earlier today The Haunting. Did anyone remember that movie, Julie Harris? It's not enjoyable, but it's you can't take your eyes off it. And the other Henry James novella that was turned successfully into a movie, I'll leave you with this, was it was called Washington Square, but it was turned into a movie called The Heiress with Olivia de Havilland. So go watch it, enjoy it, and thanks very much for coming, and thanks very much for being the first. Thank you.